When we're thinking about think tanks collaborating with each other, I think it's mostly about think tanks using similar strategies. So when I think about researchers collaborating with each other, I like to think of this framework that I've used before about whether the goals of a collaboration are the same, whether the strategies are the same. And I think, you can use this to think about collaborations across different types of organizations. And when we're thinking about think tanks collaborating with each other, I think it's mostly about think tanks using similar strategies. Right? And then in some cases, when think tanks that use the same strategies have the same goals, then it can be very fruitful collaborations that can really sparkle a lot of joint work. But of course, there may be opportunities or occasions where organizations have the same strategies. So they're think tanks, but they have different goals in mind. And then in this case, it's what you would say it's like a co-option, or kind of like a struggle to see what is the narrative or the idea that will prevail in this space or in this issue. So I think that we see that going on between think tanks. Sometimes there is these interactions that can be very collaborative if they find these same similar goals or objectives. But we have to be realistic that also think tanks will sometimes be in opposing spectrums of the types of policy changes that they want to observe, and then there can be some struggle between them. But I think that's healthy, and I think it's a matter of also acknowledging that occurs between think tanks. So I think that when we discuss evidence-based policy, that's one of those areas where the objective of think tanks really is aligned. So independently of what is your position on a given policy, think tanks will usually be in favor of it being like openly debated, of it being based on sound evidence. So I think this is definitely a space that enables the collaboration that I was just mentioning between think tanks, where they can really join forces with their strategies of communicating, of creating dialogue with different stakeholders and so on. So I think this is kind of like those spaces where collaboration can really flourish between think tanks. Collaborations between think tanks can work in different levels. So I think that collaboration sometimes within the same national context can be slightly more challenging because there's those different policy perspectives. But I think that working regionally or internationally is a really good opportunity for collaborations between think tanks. In my experience, I've built some of the strongest professional relationships by collaborating with think tanks from different countries. And I think that may also be a little bit of a challenge on maintaining these relationships between think tanks, because they become, they depend on individuals and on individuals developing that relationship over time. And when individuals change, maybe those institutional relationships may not be as strong. So I think that one key for those relationships to flourish is to find those ways to keep the connection at the more institutional level and not only at a personal level. I always think about the collaborations like constellations. I don't think that you should be forced into working with another organization like on a sustained way, or it doesn't have to be like an eternal partnership. I think that collaborations should be, these different types of constellations where a think tank can be collaborating with some on some policy aspects and with others in others, and then when those specific things are finished, then that collaboration also ends. I think that if you remain flexible like that, collaborations can be really fruitful if they're really based on a clear objective and on a clear goal. But I think that many times we try to force too much, having like ongoing partnerships, having more structure or rigid forms of partnerships, and those are very difficult to sustain. I work in a network of think tanks, and we see these flow of relationships that emerge, and I think we should support those instead of trying to sustain a very rigid way of collaborating.